So far in this free agency, chaos has been the name of the game, as we've witnessed several trades, signings, and buyouts take place within the last few days. In this video, we're going to recap and dissect a variety of teams' moves in order to determine the winners and losers thus far. But before we do, I'd like to give a quick shout out to my amazing patrons, Hunter B, Dom M, Caden D, Jonathan H, and Patrick K. If you'd like to receive some extra perks that include video previews, unseen analytics, and shoutouts such as these, head on over to my Patreon to become part of the awesome community. And with that, here are the winners and losers of free agency so far. Last season in Anaheim was likely one that most fans in Orange County would like to forget entirely, as the Ducks finished just below Columbus at the bottom of the entire league. Therefore, it's not a huge shocker that GM Pat Verbeek would want to reconstruct the lineup to some extent. And to his credit, Verbeek didn't hesitate to take action and decided to recruit both Alex Killorn and Radko Gudas. Both players have a significant amount of playoff experience and some intangibles that Verbeek seemed to welcome. However, it's rather puzzling to me why both free agents, who are well into their 30s, were paid so generously. Killorn was given a 4-year deal valued at $25 million that carries with it a full no-trade clause for the first 2 years that turns into a modified no-trade clause thereafter. As for Gudas, he was signed to a 3-year, $12 million contract that similarly has a full no-trade clause for the first 2 seasons that turns into a modified no-trade in the last year. Obviously, yes, there's the issue of cap floor. It's also possible that they had to be overpaid to come to Anaheim considering the state of the team. But after putting those circumstances aside, I'd have to call the Ducks a loser overall. Currently, the team has just over $28 million to work with, which will be more than enough to sign RFAs Trevor Zegras and Troy Terry. For the most part, during the past few off seasons, Arizona hasn't done a whole lot of actual high-quality signings. Sure, we've seen the team take on a lot of bad contracts and trades and make some low-profile depth signings, but we haven't seen such a high-caliber player brought to the desert in quite some time, as the Yotes decided to bring in Jason Zucker from Pittsburgh, who was just coming off of a decent campaign in which he was able to notch 27 goals in 48 games played. Even more impressively, 25 of those goals came at even strength. Zucker, who had a redemption arc type of season, was rebounding after a bout of injuries he faced in the season before. It was pretty much common knowledge that Zucker wouldn't be back in the Burgh for the 2023-24 season. However, most of us didn't have Zucker to Arizona on our bingo cards. Regardless, Zucker was signed to a play-and-see type of deal, valued at $5.3 million for 1 year. Arizona also brought Nick Bjugstad back as well, giving him a 2-year contract valued at $4.2 million. Honestly, as far as comparing their roster to last season, GM Bill Armstrong gets a nod from me, as a Zucker addition was an A+ in my opinion. Obviously, yes, it's a bit of an overpayment, but it's Arizona. Therefore, for the Yotes, it's a major upgrade. I think most of us had a feeling that GM Don Waddell was going to be active this free agency, as his team fell short last postseason of expectations. However, the Canes made a couple interesting additions that could complement the lineup quite well. Firstly, Michael Bunting was brought in from Toronto, who is a scrappy forward that already plays an in-your-face style of game that Carolina is most known for. Bunting finished 1 point shy of 50 last campaign and was able to record 23 goals throughout. And the contract he was signed to is, in my opinion, a pretty cap-savvy type of deal, as Bunting was given a 3-year deal valued at $3.5 million that has an AAV of $4.5 million. Also, when you thought the Canes decor couldn't possibly get any better, Waddell recruits Dmitry Orlov. Orlov is known for being able to thrive in every zone and for logging tough minutes. Orlov, who was signed to a short-term deal of 2 years at $7.75 million AAV, will give the Canes increased flexibility on the back end. Therefore, overall, the Canes are winners as far as I'm concerned, up to this point. I mean, I guess Steve Yzerman was just too perfect for too long. As it seemed, this offseason has been a major fumble on the GM's part so far. Firstly, defenseman Justin Hull was inked to a 3-year, $10.2 million deal. Hull, was known as the whipping boy in Toronto, who struggled mightily during his time as a Leaf, partially due to the fact that Hull was thrust into a bigger role than intended, largely due to injuries Toronto faced on the back end. Yzerman also decided that Shane Gostisbehere would be a good idea as well, and signed him to an experimental type of deal valued at $4.125 million. Gostisbehere spent last season playing for both Arizona and Carolina, where he recorded 41 points after 75 games played. It's definitely not fair to knock a rebuilding team for signing players to budget contracts, but I just feel like, knowing Yzerman's previous success with fleecing other teams, that he could have done better. Also, the Wings brought in another reinforcement forward in JT Compher. Compher was able to impress last season in Denver, as he had a career year that yielded 52 points in 82 games played. However, this was the very first time in 7 NHL seasons that he was even able to hit the 50-point mark. If we consider the term, which is 5 years at $5 million, Compher may not be able to remain consistent throughout. Detroit also brought in goalie James Reimer and also forward Daniel Sprong. Longtime Red Wing Philip Zadina was also reportedly put on waivers. In my mind, overall, Detroit could have done better and consequently is a loser at this point in the game. With GM Barry Trotz now calling the shots, there's been a lot of action taking place in the Music City. Firstly, Matt Duchene's contract was bought out, and Ryan Johansson found himself being shipped out to Colorado via trade. And to fill the vacant positions, Trotz sought out to bring in Ryan O'Reilly and Gustav Nyquist. O'Reilly will be bringing the intangibles of leadership and experience that the younger players will benefit from. Even though he struggled defensively as of late, O'Reilly could indeed find the steady two-way game that he once had while in St. Louis. The contract he was signed to is a modest one in comparison, as it carries a $4.5 million AAV for 4 years. Trotz also turned to Nyquist in a full attempt to hit the reset button. Nyquist, who has been hampered with injuries as of late, showed promise last postseason. As a forward, was able to notch nearly a point per game with the Wild last postseason with 5 points in 6 games played. Similarly to O'Reilly, he's signed to a budget-friendly contract that poses no major risk. His 2-year contract, valued at $6.37 million, won't be a huge gamble, but rather a play-and-see type of scenario. Even though I feel like Trotz could have done better, I still have to give him a thumbs up for his efforts. Pretty much as soon as the Jets season concluded, it was highly suspected that Blake Wheeler wouldn't be returning to Winnipeg. And unsurprisingly, Wheeler's former contract that had 1 year left was bought out by his longtime team. However, it was pretty surprising that the Jets' former captain decided to take such a pay cut with his current team, as Wheeler opted to sign at under $1 million with the New York Rangers. His $800,000 deal that's purely on a trial basis carries with it a full no-trade clause. However, it's important to remember that Wheeler will be getting a decent chunk of change in the form of $2.75 million from the Jets as well. It's definitely a pay cut, but considering that he tallied 55 points in 72 games played last season, it's a steal for Chris Drury. Speaking of veterans being signed to cheap deals, well, the Blue Shirts also recruited 3-time Stanley Cup champ Jonathan Quick as well. Quick was signed to a modest 1-year deal valued at just under $1 million. Even though Quick is no longer in his prime, he's a perfect match for the backup position in the Big Apple. Knowing that he won't have the pressure of being the number 1 guy in net will almost serve him well, given his age. To me, the Rangers are overall the biggest winners on this list, just because they decided to keep things simple and went for players that would contribute, but not mess up any ongoing chemistry. With the hiring of Kyle Dubas in Pittsburgh came the expectation with it that he'd be getting to work. And most certainly, in that regard, Dubas hasn't disappointed, as he began working feverishly to give the roster the best makeover that he was capable of. His first move of importance was trading for Riley Smith. Smith, who has 2 more years left on his $15 million contract, will cost the Penguins $5 million a season. The forward was able to reach the 50-point mark impressively for the 6th time in his career last campaign, as Riley notched 56 points in 78 games played. With the absence of Zucker, Riley could be a viable option to play alongside Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin. Secondly, Dubas decided to sign defenseman Ryan Graves to a lengthy 7-year deal valued at $27 million. Graves brings with him some size that the Penguins have been in desperate need of at 6'5" and 225 pounds. Also, Graves will be an upgrade on the back ends from Brian Dumoulin, who ended up signing with the Seattle Kraken. Even though the contract has been criticized for its length, considering that Pittsburgh will have the big three for a short amount of time, in the grand scheme of things, it's not too bad. Despite making some great moves at the start, Dubas definitely decided to, yet again, bet on a frequently injured goalie. Not Matt Murray, but Tristan Jarry. Jarry, who was signed to a 5-year extension, will be getting paid an average of $5.375 throughout. The goaltender, who fought injuries, was still able to compete in 47 games last season. However, his pattern of inconsistency didn't go unnoticed. Despite the Jarry blunder, to me, overall Pittsburgh is still a winner due to the other key additions that were made. Well, it's obvious that the Toronto Maple Leafs are no longer pushovers. No, in fact, they are anything but. As GM, Brad Living has clearly made it his mission to make sure that the Leafs have all of the grit needed for next season. With the departure of Michael Bunting came with it an opportunity to sign a player that's just as much of a pain to face, Tyler Bertuzzi. After having a short stint with the Bruins, Bertuzzi was given the opportunity on a trial basis to play within the Leafs' top 6. Similarly to Bunting, Bertuzzi is an excellent net front presence that has grit, but even more skill. As a forward, was able to net 30 goals during the 2021-22 season. As I alluded to, the contract is just for a season and is valued at $5.5 million. Speaking of grit, Treliving definitely made a statement by signing tough guy Ryan Reeves to a 3-year deal. Considering the actual AAV is only $1.35 million, the contract to me is pretty decent. While he's not exactly going to be scoring highlight reel goals, as most of us know, Reeves will be hitting anything that moves and will readily drop the gloves when need be. The one signing that didn't seem to please Leafs fans, however, was the acquisition of John Klingberg. Now, one good thing about this is the fact that the contract is for a single season. It's no secret that the Leafs have been searching for another offensive D-man to have on the back end besides just Morgan Riley. Therefore, it's easy to see the intent. And really, prior to his Anaheim days, the defenseman was elite offensively, as he was able to hit the 40-point mark with Dallas on 6 different occasions. While this may seem like a gamble, it's extremely possible that Klingberg fell victim to the Anaheim effect, meaning that while he was playing for a subpar team, his skill was still there, but he didn't have the same talent around him. And lastly, the Leafs made waves in the hockey world when Max Domi was recruited to play for the same team his father Ty once did. Definitely scrappy in his own right, Domi will be yet another reason why the Leafs won't be easy to face. And just like most of the contracts Treliving has dished out, this one is also just on a trial basis, valued at $3 million. Domi, who is 1 point shy of scoring 50 points last campaign, will be a depth piece for Toronto that's extremely versatile. Overall, even though Treliving could have done better, the Leafs are definitely tougher, something they needed to desperately be. It's going to be interesting to see when and where Matt Murray gets dealt, since it's pretty much a for sure thing, due to the fact that Ilya Samsonov still needs a re-up with Toronto. In conclusion, this will definitely not be the end of the free agency excitement to come. As most of us know, names such as Patrick Kane, Vladimir Tarasenko, and Matt Dumba are still in the market as UFAs. And there's also plenty of trade talk to go around as well. Again, if you'd like to support me and my work, you can do so by joining my Patreon. Plans start at just $1 a month, and any amount greatly helps the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.